Camera number 451 is the Nikon N4004s, which is also known as the F401s. I have reviewed the F401 and the F401X, and this one sits right in the middle of those two. And they share the same body. There's a few little alterations. You can see the efforts to bring in new features. Autofocus was certainly a major feature in the late 80s, and so this is a camera of that generation. So to operate the camera, we need to put batteries in, and they're housed in the base of the camera, and very accessible AA batteries. There's 4 of them, and we just close the latch. Unfortunately, as was common of the era, this little latch can break, but with a little bit of tape you can put over the battery compartment there and keep it in place, and the camera is good. Plastic obviously is, again, very evident. Although it's quite a hefty camera, I presume it must have some sort of metal chassis over which the plastic is put. So let's look at some of the features of the camera, shall we? So to take the lens off the camera, we have the lens release button, which is the top of the two here. The lower one allows you to choose autofocus or manual focus. But to take the lens off, we press the release button and rotate clockwise. And so regarding lenses, the lens is actually, the autofocus is driven by this pin. I'll try and zoom in if I can there. In terms of lenses, any lens that has a corresponding mechanism that the pin will fit into, this, again, I'll try and zoom in there. This rotating, that rotates the autofocus. So any lens that has autofocus and that pin can pretty much well be used in this camera. So this is an AF Nikon 28mm 2.8D, which has a aperture ring. However, the camera will use quite happily this G lens, which doesn't have an aperture ring, but crucially, we can again zoom in, it has the pin there, so autofocus is achievable, and pretty much all the modes as well I think are available to that particular lens. And then the final lens I've got, in fact this is the lens I'm going to be using when I go out with the camera, is this Nikon 28-85 autofocus. Has the aperture ring and has the pin to drive the autofocus. We can of course use manual focus lenses if we want, but you really are on your own. You have no exposure control by the camera. You'd have to use an external meter. So there really is no incentive to do that. In fact, use an autofocus lens and then stick it into manual. So there we go. So let's put the lens back on. On the left-hand side, let's do the left-hand side. The other button is the locks the focus. Locks the exposure. So it's an exposure lock when we're shooting an image, perhaps our image, we focus, we acquire exposure, and then we can lock that in and then perhaps recompose our image if we so desire. Looking to the top plate, we have on the left hand side here the self-timer button, and then we have our flash, which we press the buttons and lift up, and then that activates the flash. Looking through the viewfinder, we have a series of 5 LEDs. The left hand, starting from the left hand side, there's a green one which shows focus. So when that focus is locked, that will illuminate. And then we have a series of 3 LEDs which are red, a minus, a 0 and a plus. They are for exposure. So we want to achieve just the 0, but I found sometimes I had both a 0 and a plus or a 0 and a minus, showing that the image would be slightly underexposed or overexposed. But most of the time I just got the individual red circle that shows that exposure was good. And then the final one is a red lightning bolt showing that the flash has been activated. So they're the system of information that you get through the viewfinder. No aperture numbers or shutter speeds. It's very simple in that sense. So on the right hand side we have the Nikon Decision Master System, and this is where we control both our aperture and our shutter speeds. So that's why it's important to lock the aperture if we have an aperture ring, and then we turn the camera on. So I've got it on here. It's on L is locked, and that's effectively the camera turned off. But if we then press the middle button here and rotate it to A and S, we now have a camera that is basically a point and shoot, and the camera will make all the decisions regarding exposure, and we have no control over that, which is what we want sometimes. We just want to go out and take images. However, we want a bit more control. We can have an aperture priority camera by pressing the button and taking the lower dial off the S, and then we choose our aperture, and the camera will choose the correct shutter speed. Conversely, if we put that back on S and take the top dial off A, we now choose our shutter speeds, and the camera will respond by choosing the aperture. As I say, we don't have any information through the viewfinder, just those row of LEDs. And then we have our shutter button, and it's quite a noisy focus. And then we have our film counter, and then to rewind the film is advanced, and then we have to manually rewind the film by pressing this lower rubbery button and sliding the switch there, and then that will rewind the film back into the canister. To put the film in the camera, we simply lift the film latch, and then we have the film, and then we place our film. It's DX coding, no way to override that. If for some reason our canister doesn't have DX coding, it will revert to 100 ISO. When we've put our film into our camera, there is an indication through this little window that we've put the film into the camera correctly. It rotates, and then the dial will also move as well. If it doesn't, then the camera won't work. So we have to make sure of that. Once the film has finished, actually there is a red indicator just under where my finger is here that will illuminate, showing that the film has finished. Or indeed, if there is no film, it will do the same thing, I believe. So that's pretty much it really as far as the camera goes, and so I'm looking forward to using it, as I say, with my newly acquired lens. And so this is the Nikon N4004s or F401s, camera number 451.